to Airport Station, and I'll hand over to the colleagues from McDonald.
Yeah, thanks very much. So we'll get cracking. So yeah, like I said, this talk tonight is about the Nexus project for South Gosforth Junction to Airport Station. This was a fantastic collaborative project between McDonald's and Nexus. Really great opportunity for young engineers like Noya to get involved in the design and start leading the design. So we really enjoyed doing this. Just like to say thanks for the PWI for inviting us to speak tonight, especially to Glenn for making this happen. Carry on. So in terms of introductions, my name is Jennings. I'm the head of track for McDonald's. In terms of this project, I had oversight of the project from tender through to delivery and a little bit of design management at the start. James?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm James Arbuckle, so I'm the Principal Permanent Way Engineer in McDonald. I also undertook the role of Project Manager, Engineering Manager and Track CRE on the Airport Launch project as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Noya. I'm a Permanent Way Engineer at McDonald and I'm the lead designer for this project.
Glenn?
And my name is Melvin. I'm the Principal Engineer for Permanent Way at Nexus and Project Sponsor, and you'll see me later on. You can't see me on screen at the minute. Thank you.
There's a hell of a good shot on that.
So tonight's agenda, we've been through the introductions. We're going to have a few slides on McDonald's capability. I'll try and run through that fairly quickly because I'm sure people want to see the technical stuff. James is going to provide a project overview. Noya's going to have a bit of a deep dive into the design. James is going to talk about progress to date, and then Glenn's going to give a little bit of a Nexus update at the end, and James will finish up with some of the lessons learned from the project. So in terms of McDonald's capability, I'll try and keep it short and sweet. So interestingly enough, a bit of local history with the Tyne Bridge. So this was originally designed by David Anderson of Mott, Hay and Anderson back in the early part of this century. Mott, Hay and Anderson then merged with Sir Murdoch MacDonald in 1989 and they formed Mott MacDonald. So we've got a bit of history in the area. In terms of our capability, so at the minute we've got over 3,000 employees working on rail projects in Europe and the UK, so pretty extensive. And we've got offices all around the UK and also in Europe and India and Spain servicing railway projects. And we've got some really good rail core capability, so we can service all facets of rail projects. So we're predominantly going to talk about track perspective tonight, but we've got OCS, telecoms, bridges, etc. So a lot of coverage from us. And in terms of our track team, we've currently got 26 track engineers around the UK in various locations, so good geographical coverage. And we can also call on high value expertise in the Czech Republic and Poland as well. And finally, a little bit on our capabilities. So we can cover the whole suite of rail projects, high speed, heavy rail, metro like this project, and light rail as well. And on projects like the recent Nexus project, we've been doing predominantly alignment design, gauging, track form, and also using some specialist software. But we can do lots of different things like inspection, construction and maintenance, and some of the safety activities as well. And if you are interested in getting in touch, I'll just pop my contact details at the bottom there. So now that's the, I guess the boring part out of the way. I'm now going to hand over to James. He's going to give a bit of a project overview.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so moving on to the South Gosforth Junction to Airport Station Renewals Project, which I'll give a little bit of background on. So as the name suggests, this is a project to renew life-expired assets over 8.2 kilometres of Newcastle Metro route between Gosforth and Newcastle Airport. Nexus engaged McDonald as principal designers, and our scope was to survey the routes, carry out track, drainage and OLE design to enable the renewals, and then continue our principal design role under CDM throughout the construction phase. Some headline statistics: there's 6 stations along the route, so 12 platforms, 3 crossovers, 5 level crossings, and 8 bridge structures as well, so plenty of constraints to keep the design interesting. A little bit on the project aims. So these aims are applicable to all renewals projects, but equally applicable to the airport line renewals. So number one, of course, is renewal of life expired assets. Number two, reducing maintenance liability, so reducing the need for maintenance tamping, re-rail, grinding, ballast cleaning, etc., all kinds of maintenance activities, and potentially reducing the need and frequency of walkouts and maintenance inspections as well. Three, connecting communities and cities, especially on such a critical route, connecting Newcastle's residents to their airport, improving reliability of the network, and especially critical infrastructure such as the early infrastructure and the switching crossings, and as well as improving passenger experience, mainly at the stations. So a little bit on the design and construction programme. So the surveys took place between September 23 and Jan 24. McDonald engaged our supplier, Seven Partnership, to carry out topographical surveys, gauging height and status surveys, and a general asset condition survey. The topo was recorded using a 3D laser scanning technique, which gave us a point cloud file, which we found really beneficial because we could then go back at a later date and draw extra detail from that point cloud, which we didn't have in the original topo, without the need for additional site visits. So there's a little bit of a health and safety benefit as well from the technique. The design took place between December 23 and October 24. So the construction drawings, the AFC drawings, were submitted in October last year. And the construction is taking place over various stages, two of which are already complete. So the earliest stage was the Region Centre early works, which were completed in Jan of last year. So Nexus identified a weekend blockade in January as an opportunity to accelerate a critical part of the renewals. We helped facilitate that by accelerating part of our survey, and then we turned around the construction-ready design in 3 weeks, which is pretty good. Although I say we, I was on holiday, so all credit goes to colleagues for doing that. The next stage was the Fordham renewals, which were completed in August. So that included replacement of Fordham level crossing and also the inbound track of Fordham station. And the remaining work will take place between spring of this year until summer 2027, with the next stage, I think, planned to be Ponteland Bridge in the spring. Claire will speak a little bit more about that later in the presentation. So a little bit on the interfacing projects. So there are various projects that we have to consider in our design. The most important of which, as you're probably all aware of, is the new rolling stock introduction. So Nexus are introducing new fleets of Sadler Class 555 trains, the first of which was successfully put into passenger service in December, and the rest are being rolled out in a phased introduction at the moment. So we had to consider that in the gauging assessments and also carefully consider it in the platform train interface. We've also got Gosforth Depot, so that was completed in January of 2024. And that's a brand new depot to look after the new trains. As part of that, there was a section of track used, which was excluded from our scope, but we had to make sure that we tied in our alignment into that scope, into that piece of track. And then more recently, we've got the OLE renewal. So that's a more recent project. The design is currently being undertaken by Pure and Frey, and it involves replacement of OLE infrastructure between Ilford Road and Regent Centre, and it involves around 20 to 30 new masts on the west side of Gosforth Junction, I believe. So that will interface with our project. So there's a little bit of integration work to take place between those two projects. And we're currently talking to Nexus about potentially taking on the principal designer work for that project as well, with a view to deliver them in parallel in 27. And a little bit more on the design scope before Noya dives into the details. So the track, we specified various categories of renewal, all the way from as simple as a tamp stress and ballast tip, all the way to a full digger and renewal. And to give you an idea of the split, the category H renewal, which is the tamp stress and ballast, covered around 5 kilometres of route, and around 1 kilometre was the full renewal. The remaining 2 kilometres were various levels of renewal, such as skim dig or re-rail and the like. The drainage renewal was limited to 300 metres of positive drainage renewal in the Kingston Park area, and for the rest of the route, it was was limited to an asset condition survey and manhole inspection. One of the results of the manhole inspection was that we've specified the newer style lightweight GRP manhole covers to replace the existing metal covers. And that was because there's a little bit of degradation with the covers, but also there's a longer term CVM and health and safety benefit around that, lowering the risk of heavy handling, future maintenance activities. And the OLE scope was a little simpler, so that was limited to a height and stagger survey and then a height and stagger design in order to improve existing non-compliances, but mainly to make sure the height and staggers matched on through a line design. So that's it from the overview. So I'll now pass over to Noya, who will speak a little bit more on the notable parts of the technical plan.
Great, thanks very much. So yeah, I'm going to talk us through the designs in detail, and please remember to save any questions for the end. So starting off with one of our key project aims, and that was the platform training interface. So Nexus does operate a closed system. So when we were working with our designs, we were working to restricted platform offsets, which were specific to that rolling stock. So we were looking at X offsets of 719 and Y of 900, which is different to your standard NR offsets. Nexus provided us with the vehicle models so we could do our gauging design into clear route, although that didn't include the retractable step that you'll find in class 555. Therefore, we couldn't assess any stepping distances. So that's why it's particularly important for us to get those offsets correct as much as we could. So we mostly did achieve that through the alignment design alone, but when we did have steam links, and in one location we also had co-planing of the platform, and that was at Kingston Park Station, where we had a like-for-like SSC renewal at one end of the platform, and a level crossing at the other end of the platform, restricting what we could do with the alignment through there. Where we did still have any out of tolerance values, we made sure that any deviations were limited to outside the train stopping area, and therefore not where the passengers were stepping onto the trains. So looking at S&C, we had 3 crossovers on this design. All of them were CV9.25. All of them had a crossing speed of 35 kilometers per hour, and all 3 did sit on curved track. So one that I mentioned earlier at Kingston Park Station, there we did a full S&C renewal. We looked at maintaining a like-for-like there to make sure that we maintain that crossing speed of 35 kilometers per hour. And we also limited lift and sleuth in this area to maintain that OCS contact on curved track. Looking at upgrades, we upgraded the timber sleepers to the modern equivalent EG47 concrete bearers, and we also installed the shallow depth switches, which are preferred for robustness as opposed to the full depth switches. For cost and efficiency savings, we did also retain the existing point motors in that location. Slightly more interesting were the 2 sets of crossovers at Airport Station, where we did 2 heavy refurbishments. So this was an interesting location because the alignment was on a sag as it approached the island platform, which meant that each of the turnouts did actually sit on a different grade. And we also had the tracks separating on the approach to that island platform. Here we did also do a conversion to the shallow depth switches, again for the same reason, that robustness. So our designer did have his work cut out for him here. He did manage to maintain like vertical and horizontal design standards, and that included designing a 1,000-meter radius sagging curve through that crossing route there. So one particularly interesting area that I actually worked on was a Pontine Bridge. So Pontine Bridge is a direct fixed concrete bridge, and right now we have life-expired Pan 9 base plates on there. So Nexus requested that we replace these with the Fastlit SFC base plates, and these are better for noise and vibration mitigation. They're a more modern component. They're also in use on the biker viaduct in the network at the minute, so that was useful for streamlining maintenance. And they also come in a 4-hole configuration to improve redundancy in the bolts. Unfortunately, we found that there was not enough space in the trough. So if you see the picture on the top left, that shows you where the base plates are sitting in a trough. And the Fastlit installation tool requires 250 mil clear each side of the rail. The trough was 670 mil wide, but that includes a 120 mil drainage channel, and therefore the rail is not centered in that space, and there wasn't enough room for the tool. So the picture on the bottom right actually shows Pandrol doing some work, looking at how they can minimize the amount of space needed for that Fastlit tool, because this is actually a known issue. Another thing that's probably not obvious there is that the SFC base plate is 400 mil wide, And if you're doing amount, 670 minus 120 is 450. However, the rail was not centered in that 450 either, so the base plate itself was actually too wide for the space as well. So the alternative we were offered by Pandrol was the ESRS E-clip system, which offers similar improvements against PAN 9s, however it doesn't require that faster installation tool. And we did have a look at the topo survey, and we found that there was enough room for those within the construction tolerances, because even though they were also 400 mil long, we were able to trim the construction shim by 20 mil, so we had 380. Something that came out when we had a look at the as-built drawings that we had available and also the CAD data that Pandrol provided to us was that the bolt holes from the PAN 9s and the ESRS base plates didn't line up. And therefore, there was an increased risk of striking rebar on the bridge during the construction process. So what we recommended was that ferroscan was carried out prior to any construction work just to reduce the risk of striking that rebar. Also, something else we looked at in this area was limiting the amount of vertical lift across the bridge, and that was to limit the amount of grout that would be underneath the base plates. The reason for that is that we want to maintain as much of the bowl inside the concrete depth, where it's reinforced concrete, and not so much of it in the grout. And again, both of these were important because we didn't have that redundancy of the four-hole system since the ESRS only comes in a two-hole configuration. So the last bit of design that I'd like to call attention to is at Bankfoot. So overall, as James mentioned earlier, we were looking at maintenance liability. And one of the design types we used to achieve this was working to a 50-50 CAN ratio. And that was a research-based target based on findings that it's better for wheel wear and for rolling contact fatigue. We were also looking at removing cant through the stations where possible. However, at Bankfoot, what we found was that curve indicated by the orange line, which is about a rate of 400 meters, the cant deficiency was so high that it went beyond what was beneficial. We also had very high rates of change in the subsequent transition, and so we were looking at something that went against our goals for passenger comfort as well. We couldn't adjust this by changing the cant design through the level crossing, but we were trying to avoid having to do any road profile assessments. We wanted to maintain that as close to existing as possible. So what we did end up proposing was that we do a speed change. So the speed sign that you can see in the picture on the top right is currently 80 kilometers per hour, and we recommended reducing that down to 70 kilometers per hour. And we justified that on the basis that the level crossing is designed for 50, and we, very high level assessment, didn't believe that the 80 kilometers per hour speed was really being reached in that location. So what we suggested is to reduce that to 70 and then move that 80 kilometer speed sign to the end of that curve. One thing that we did look at for future reference there was that that new speed sign now sits at the beginning of a transition element. So you have a variable rate of change where the speed is possibly changing as well. And it just may want to look in the future at moving that further to the end of the transition element to improve passenger comfort further. So now I'll just talk through a couple of design tools that we used on this project in addition to standard industry software. So the first is Dash, which is our sort of one-stop shop within McDonald's for track design. So Dash helps us to do our track calculations. It also allows us to import XML designs from Bentley software. That includes Open Rail Designer, which is the replacement for BRT, the Bentley Rail Track. It also exports deliverables into Excel to deliverables that we can give out to our clients, such as Nexus. And things like Dash are important because it helps us to improve our design, our checking efficiency, and also the consistency in our deliverables. And that was particularly important in projects like Nexus, where we had multiple designers working along the route, but also quite a long alignment that we were working with. So an example of how we use Dash on Nexus would be the calculation of equivalent gradients, where we were doing a curved S&C design. And the second tool that I'll talk about is Moata. So Moata is McDonald's digital platform. It offers digital solutions for collaboration, for data sharing, and for project delivery. And one of these solutions is the Moata Intelligent Content Library. So this is a smart library. It offers parametric components. So for example, on a catch bit, you might tell it I need 5 levels, and it will put in those 5 levels for you. You can adjust that. And that video shows a designer using this managed BIM library to design the drainage design at Kingston Park Station. So that is actually Kingston Park Station design, and that information did appear on deliverables. Moata also offers track components, so we have sleepers, rails, buffer stops, etc. And we use that on other projects, not specifically on Nexus, but other projects for our deliverables as well. One thing I didn't mention, the Marata also comes with the carbon portal, which is another Marata solution, and that can be tied into tools like the bin library here, so that we can make more sustainability focused decisions by doing a carbon measuring during the design process. I'll pass back over to James to talk a bit about progress in design.
Thank you very much, Noya. Okay, so yeah, a little bit on progress to date. Although really it's just an excuse to get some pictures of the plant and proper engineering in the presentation. So top 3 pictures are from the Region Centre works in Jan, and the bottom 3 pictures from Fordham works in August. And yeah, it's just some work in progress pictures, obviously all complete and from what I understand all went successfully without too many issues. I believe feedback is that the sort of ride quality has improved in both those areas, both for rail users and road users over the level crossing. So good news stories all around, and hopefully that continues for the future construction stages. Speaking of which, hopefully now Glenn will talk a little bit from next point of view and give an update on the construction programme.
Yeah, so my name is Melvin, Principal Engineer for Arbuckle Nexus and Project Sponsor. So thanks for that, guys. And, you know, a great piece of design work, 8 kilometres worth of route, but 16 kilometres worth of track, right, and 16 kilometres worth of alignment changes, as well as the renewals and all that sort of stuff going on. But the proof in the pudding is seeing what it's like when it's constructed. Designs always look good on paper, but you know, like I say, the proof in the pudding is constructing it and seeing what the results are afterwards. Now, the idea on this commission was that we would produce this design in 2024-25, which was, you know, that objective was met, and that we would put this design on the shelf for a year or so until we do the work. That funding hasn't arrived yet, right? So the renewals have been deferred, right? Now, renewals do get deferred. It happens nationally as well. But sometimes there are some things that just can't wait that long. I think at the minute, correct me if I'm wrong, Kath, our main works, our delivery of the bulk of this is going to be in 27, 28. Now, I decided that some things just couldn't wait that long. So what have we done already? And James mentioned some of this earlier, right? We've done Region Centre, which is a Category D renewal. Those in Network Rail, you talk about Cats 1 to 14, I think it was when I was there. We've adopted the same type of work, but just use letters rather than numbers. But the Cat D works was rail and ballast replacement. Nothing wrong with the sleepers out there. The rail was shot, but the formation was shot. You talked about track quality there beforehand, ride quality and whatever. We were putting speeds on there because the place was riddled with wet beds. So we had to do that. That's been done. James mentioned Fordham. Right. A couple of years ago, before new fleet arrived, we had a scheme to deliver platform compliance. We went into Fordham. I think we had Arcadis done an alignment design through there. Tamped it and got it up to compliance. Didn't last 5 minutes. Soggy ballast, as a previous project manager called it. Poor formation. Track only goes one way when the traffic went down. So we had to accelerate that renewal and do that renewal there. We also put some rail in on the South Gosforth curves. That on the McDonald's design is a Cat F full renewal, but again the rail was heavily side worn and full of defects. And so we've done that. So that's what we've already done. All right. Region Centre and Fordham. We use our DRP on our TAMBA. We don't have a track recording train here, but we've got a track recording facility, and the SDs for what's being constructed are all in green. And you know, the proof of the pudding is getting on the train and riding through it. Although it's not fast through Fordham level crossing, Region Centre has got a decent speed, and the ride is super. What are we doing now? Go to the next slide, please.
Thank you.
Right, so more stuff that needs to be done. In particular, Ponteland Road Bridge. You might have seen the photograph that James showed us before, and what Naya talked about, the direct fastenings on the old pan type base plates are shot. One or two consecutives, but not out of standard at the minute. Will it last until 27, 28? Absolutely not. So we're going in this year, in May I think it is, 5-day blockade to sort that out. And also, although Kingston Park is, again, it's a full Cat F renewal, we've decided to change the rail out there, so we're going to have to change that category on that works from an F to I think it'll be a G or something. We'll talk about that separately later. But in those renewal sites that you've designed up, we've removed all of the old rail and put new rail in because minimum section depth was, well, I'll not say no more about that, but it needed changed out. Right. So that's that. Kingston Park's completed on Ponteland Road Bridge in May this year. And then next slide, please. Having done what I've described on the previous two slides, I'll be able to sleep at night. And then in 27, 28, the main contract, we'll combine the track renewals that still need done and all the Cat H refurbishment, thousands of tons of ballast and miles of tamping to do. Combine that with the overhead line renewals that James and the team described earlier into a, how many day blockade?
6 week.
6 week blockade. That's a beast. And of course the switches and crossings will be done in there as well. So ITT for the main contract, summer 2026. Sorry, it's on the board there. 6 week blockade, Gosforth the airport, summer 2027. The public will love us for that when they're all trying to head off to the Canaries for the holidays. Thank you.
Well, okay, thank you very much, Glenn. So yeah, before we close, just briefly go through some lessons learned that we have for the project. It's still ongoing, so these are not sort of complete, but after we submitted the design, we had a bit of a session to between McDonald and Nexus, just to give a bit of feedback both ways and discuss what we thought has gone well, what hasn't gone well for future projects. And thankfully, most of the feedback was positive in both directions, which is good. So number one was the sort of regular and open communication we felt we had between the two parties, whether that be through regular meetings, ad hoc calls, email communication. We felt that sort of response times in both ways were very quick. That helped us to get decisions made very quickly and help keep up the pace of the programme. We adopted a progressive assurance approach, so as well as the more formal design reviews, such as the typical IBC IDRs that you have, we also had lots of ad hoc, informal technical reviews between ourselves and Glenn. And that meant that when we ended up submitting the Form B, there was no surprise in there. I think when we actually did submit the Form B, I think we didn't get any DRN comments back from the track design, which is probably a sign that the progressive assurance did its job. There was a very clear technical scope at the beginning from Nexus, which was brilliant. Really helped us to plan efficiently, deliver efficiently, and bid efficiently as well. So that was a great positive. Number four, we felt that Nexus's team had a really good knowledge of their assets, which we relied upon heavily during the design process. And that also links in with fast decision making that I mentioned earlier. Number five, last of the sort of positive ones, for innovations enabled a more efficient delivery. So some of the tools that Noya mentioned earlier, such as the Moata Intelligent Design, our internal dash tool, as well as other tools such as Open Rail Designer that we've recently adopted. We felt that really helped us to deliver quickly, and that was evident in the Regent Centre 3-week programme that we managed to turn around. And then maybe just one constructive lessons learned, that we felt that the future project may benefit from more site visits. So our surveyors did a great job of getting to all the detail from the point clouds and the topo surveys. But certain areas, particularly Ponteland Bridge, could have really benefited from the engineers being out on site themselves, seeing it with their own eyes, taking measurements, getting an understanding of the context of the design. And we got there in the end, but it's probably one of the things that took a longer amount of time than the rest. So it could have been resolved perhaps with a site visit or everything. But overall, we felt it's been a really positive project, positive experience for us, and yeah, look forward to sort of more projects in the future, hopefully, with Nexus. So I'll now pass over to Gavin to close the presentation.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for your attention. Hopefully that was an interesting presentation. Like I said, a really good collaborative project between MOTS and Nexus. I guess we'll just hand over to some questions now from the floor and from on the online chat as well.
Agenda's out. Any questions on the floor?
It's going very good.
You said that you use company bearers for the S&C. Would you consider composite bearers?
No.
I think network rail-wise, I'm just doing the first of the trials of composite bearers or the FFU bearers in S&C. So Ferry Hill's the first one, or one of the first nationally for FFUs. I'm not aware. When are you using composite?
Do you want me to answer that one? I specified concrete. I know, you know, it's easy for me to say that, but why did I say that? I'm uncomfortable with what I'm hearing about linear expansion of composite bearers in S&C. I've certainly had lengthy conversations with Progress Rail, who will be manufacturing S&C for us, and some of the issues that they had with some of the London Underground builds. I do believe Network Rail are currently working on that to try and solve that issue. So that was one of the main reasons why I didn't go for composite. The other one is, you know, composite is late, you know, and you know, airport where some of this S&C has a long history. You may remember from your time at Nexus of struggling in the summer and the hot weather. You know, as far as I recall, by standard in terms of CRT, it has to be like timber. So there's a reduction of 9 degrees there straight away. So that's why I would always go for concrete. The other part is it's just damn expensive. You know, it's almost we have to consider these things. Our stage gate process actually mandates us to do that, and we've asked for you know, costs for concrete versus composite, and at the minute it's just far too expensive. But I don't like them because they're too late. And lastly, composite bearers, right? It's still a base plated and screwed system, which is a maintenance liability. With a concrete bearer, you know, it's an embedded handrail housing with a single handrail ability, let's say, much less maintenance. Screwed base plated systems, and I still find it bizarre that Network Rail put concrete bearers in, which, you know, because they have base plates on, and you know, bought up the muscular screws and all that sort of stuff. I mean, that's such a maintenance liability. Yeah. So that's why we didn't put composite. I'm probably unlikely to put any in either.
We've definitely used composite and FFU on other projects where there's been particular constraints, and you know, lighter application, and straight track, and definitely on long timber bridges where you're not able to look at an alternative. So it's definitely a viable option, but as
we'll definitely be considering it for the long timber bridges.
You've got to consider the specific application.
But did the S&C go in loose then?
It's not in yet. But no, modular. It's being built as we speak by Progress Rail, but it will be split bearer modular, and it just lends itself to, you know, putting one half in at a time and having, you know, the opposite line to service the. Because, you know, as you can imagine, we can't get a key rock crane or anything like that, you know, whatever. and I would never permit loose relay. That's like going back to the dark ages in the 80s. Modular is yeah.
Strangely, where does he take a lot of modular out now?
Yeah, I think the freight has the hell of them, doesn't it?
I've got quite a big conversion program on modular.
Yeah. We've not had any problems like that. I mean, we just run buses with steel wheels, really.
So yeah, generally speaking now, asset policy wise, they'll not let you put modular in on the routes, because there's got that many problems with the modular systems.
Yeah.
In terms of the overall scope of the project, was any special consideration given to the airport location as a strategic asset, given the two 100-year floods that we've experienced there that wiped everything out? So, in the last 10 years, all that S&C has been underwater, and the water's been up to the platform top. We lost the substation, we lost all the pointing equipment, mechanical pumps, and yet we've kind of done what I would call a like-for-like S&C renewal. So no consideration to moving any of the strategic equipment further up the bank, such as cable runs.
Cable runs, well, that's not a big asset. In terms of moving the S&C, I mean, the cost of that signal would just be tremendous. It would just blow. It would consume all of the funding that we get for government for that 1 year. So and we do that every time. We also, not in this location, but Kingston Park, that crossover. We ask the business, do we actually need it? It's not used very often, but it always comes back. Operations always put a strong case to keep them. But we always ask those questions. The first question is on an S&C renewal: do we actually need this? How often is it used? Why do you need it? But we abandoned the S&C at Benton, and the cost of resignaling and changes in the control room was more than the cost of taking the S&C out of Plain Line. So yes, we consider it, but
that would kill it at the airport.
Yeah,
It would be nice to have those crossovers.
Yeah,
further down towards Callan on its way.
Yeah.
I think as well as some drainage improvements being made over the last 5 or so years down there, hasn't there?
The drainage has been fixed. The issue with the culvert further upstream's all been fixed and line and everything, but sometimes these things break. It could happen again.
The other question was bank foot level crossing designed for 50 kilometres per hour, you said. Was that realistic given the signal and controls you've got through there?
Because we take the trains over there 15 here on that short restriction.
Is there ever a train going to go over there at 50?
No. But the main area is that higher speed with a very short restriction in the area. So no, you correct me if I'm wrong here. I think it's difficult to design in that bit at 50, that bit at 15, and that bit at 50, and get your rates of change right. So the whole area has to be designed for 50. At the end of the day, that gives a better alignment. It's never going to be run at 50, but it's a much smoother alignment if it's designed at that point. And we are actually, although we only run at 80 here, 50 miles per hour, I'd expect these guys to be designed to a slightly higher speed if you like to get a smoother alignment.
Is there any camp through bank foot crossing that have you took the camp off?
There is camp through it, it's like 35.
Yeah. And to take that off would have meant going up the highway and all that cost, which we wanted to avoid.
If I can ask another selfish question.
I knew I'd get those questions.
I'm intrigued that you said the basket tool into the bridge. Was that a manual tool or the mechanical tool?
The manual tool.
Right. Could you not use the auto clipper?
Is that not wider? They didn't offer us any tool that would fit in that space. We did ask a question.
So the Chambray clipper, for argument's sake, would, I don't know what the dimensions are, but would tend to work in a smaller window than a basket puller.
Is that this? Is that?
What's
is that
that?
different?
That's all I'm thinking of.
More that, but that's a similar type thing. The Chambray one's just a single one where it's on one
Just
leg.
one rail.
Like a wheelbarrow.
Okay. Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Because I was wondering that earlier. Actually, say that.
Yeah, I think the principle of that would be very similar to Chambray.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, didn't consider that specifically, but we were talking to Pandrol about the spatial constraints, and we were.
Pandora would have done their due diligence on that, so I'm sure we'll imagine.
I just tend to be a big fan of the Boslow system, to be fair, rather than the Pandrol system. Personally.
Yeah, we had a look at Boslow based bits as well.
Yeah,
I think
we're
it's
looking
the
for a
same,
full alternative.
the same sort of spatial issue, the channel in the bridge. Yeah, we did quickly.
Online questions in the chat box, but
Go for it.
just go for it. Yeah. So Ben Brooks, Norway's comment on Nexus being a closed system was interesting. What tangible benefit does the passenger see?
Passenger seats, when I say closed system, it's very fact it's a single rolling. I think it'll be single rolling stock in the future, and that's why we're working to a specific offset. In terms of the passenger seats, I suppose stepping distances are consistent, we're always working to that design limit.
Effectively, the offsets can be optimised for the single type of rolling stock system compared to network rail where you've got multiple gauges running through.
Yeah, how much better the stepping distances? That's it. Just one from Ben.
Could I ask from a point of view of scope creep on something like this? How do you manage the scope creep? Does that become something that almost Glenn has a defined budget and you try and manage back to that budget best endeavours? Does it become something that you end up just checking everything and taking stuff out that someone deems as outside scope? It's always an interesting principle, really.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of our sort of design scope, it says we've got a really clear technical work scope at the beginning, which defined it very well. And I guess for us, any sort of scope creep that doesn't match up with that original work scope was that. So we're outside of that scope. So we constantly refer back to that and the sort of big requirements or RTT requirements, I suppose. We monitor against that, but. I don't know how it's managed in terms of the sort of wider project budget and your scopes going.
I guess the collaboration, wasn't it? We were just, like James says, we had a decent technical scope, so if we're seeing differences, we're immediately highlighting those to Nexus and we're having collaborative discussions to see the best way to take that forward. So it's definitely things we did outside the original scope.
Absolutely.
For example, a good example of that would be accelerating the region centre work. So Nexus identified an early session that they could take an opportunity in. As a result of that, we were able to accelerate that scope to make it happen. So I think change management and scope creep can work well as long as you're both working collaboratively together. If it's a bit more adversarial, that's when it becomes a bit more challenging because you're perhaps having those more difficult discussions in the background.
I think this one, correct me if I'm wrong, we did it on our normal T's and C's, not like an NEC contract or anything, so I had full discussion about any changes, and anything was recorded between both parties and nothing was really done unless it was instructed. And that's because we have a limited budget, as I said before, and certain things we can do, certain things as a project team we can't without getting approval from up the line. So it worked well, I thought. I hope.
Sometimes a difficult balance to be had where, if you put a different hat on the maintenance team, for argument's sake, will be saying, well, why aren't you doing this, why aren't you doing that? There's various people who pull you different directions, and to try and get that in the sweet spot is a difficult thing. Quite often.
It's not that difficult in Nexus, but that's pretty difficult. I put together a pretty robust spec, with a lot of detail in there, but inevitably, when they get out on site and start to do the surveys, and it works both ways. You need to extend this plan because of X, Y, or Z, or actually you don't need to go that far in that location. So it does work both ways.
I think your scope was very much focused on the maintenance benefits, wasn't it? And from the start, Glenn, that really helped with that sort of.
in terms of the other disciplines as well, and access we always run a fairly tight ship as well, Glenn. I think that's the polite way of putting it.
But has to be, otherwise,
Yeah,
I remember a previous director kicking everybody's ass because it's good, you know, that was the devil. So we've learned to minimise it.
But also early engagement with, you know, our other disciplines certainly helps that as well.
Going back to many, many years ago, when it was originally built, it was originally a single line, which was made up the twin track up to the airport. I wondered if you found any variation in the ground conditions because the outline was used as a haul road when it was originally built. And I can remember going up there and saying, tip the lorries up to the axles in mud on what was to become the outline. Just wondered if you'd encountered any.
We've done extensive trial runs throughout the whole area and other areas where some sort of stuff went wrong. And I can tell you now, there's no ballast underneath the track in Kingston Park. None. And that probably harks back to what you're describing here about temporary alignments and slewing track, stuff like that. The only ballast that's on in Kingston Park really is the top ballast, the crib ballast.
Yeah.
Very little bit. There's some under there, you put it under the gates. And it was the same at Forden, but Forden was more problematic, which is why we've accelerated and done that in Europe.
Yeah, I was site agent for North Tyneside, but I used to often sneak up to the airport line to see how it was going. It's interesting.
So you were on the loop, like, right now we know who built in the problems. And then on goes to the loop.
There's one to North Tyne and then Tyne to Gillingham.
He's going for a site visit to see what it's all built like afterwards. Is that the plan? Sit on the metro to the end.
And you can come along to the blockade in May and we're doing Ponteen and Road. It's an ideal opportunity to get out and have a look at the whole area.
Yeah.
See what we've done, have a look at the bridge.
Yeah.
Has that, in all seriousness, has the 6-week summer blockade actually been mooted to relevant parties? What's the feedback been? You know, to like local authorities or airport administrations? Has there
Well,
been?
that's a good question. I don't know.
It all ties in with the planning, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I think there are discussions about us in terms of that and things that we're.
Yeah, because I mean, even closing it for a weekend blockade, we used to get horrendous grief on the airport.
Yeah.
For 6 weeks seems
And it's the entire summer holidays.
summer holidays.
And it's part of the coastal route as well, because the outline would stretch up along them.
Because it was meant to be earlier, but it's been pushed back.
It's staggered time backs, so we get the east end of the depot back up and running. The entire coastal route run from city centre back up and running, and then complete everything else off on the airport end. But if what we want to deliver is going to be delivered, it's going to take time.
There's never a good time for a close.
It's never a good time yet.
No, but 6 weeks is a heavy chunk compared to weekend blockades.
It is.
Better than no metro in the long run. Against that. But it will be difficult, like all public interfaces are when we're closed.
All upset a few people definitely when I close the railway for 6 weeks.
Express masses.
Technical questions?
Say segments.
You can. One more, I think, because they've wrapped up because we're on pub after this.
Where sleepers are specified for renewal, included on the sleeper part.
We're only in S&C so far. Not in plain line, but thinking about it, but again, plain line volumes, it's only 1,000 metres on here, but some of the other areas we're talking 5 or 6 kilometres.
Is it a substantial increase in cost for Nexus if you have USB compared to standard G44?
Network rail cost is a lot.
Yeah, I'm just wondering,
There's a
because
30%.
I guess you don't get the volume savings, do you, that
That's the difference. Obviously, the material costs being with it.
It does feel a bit disproportionate, I think, hence why they tend not to use super pads, the same user music pads.
I mean, it shouldn't be that significant.
The few slippers and tiny yacht you could have borrowed.
I know, I see them every day like this, so.
I mean, it's the equivalent to a roll of 10 on.
That it from a question point of view, nothing left
There's
on,
nothing else, no?
online. Well, thank you for that. Vote of thanks, Phil.
Okay. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you visit us here tonight, and a very interesting local project. We're always keen to hear about Nexus. But, you've done it fabulous justice tonight from both a design perspective and a construction perspective. And it's interesting to see how you arrived at solutions for certain locations, which for me personally gave me headaches for 50 years or thereabouts. But it's very impressive, and I look forward to seeing some of the work to come to fruition once you get your budget sorted out. And you know, I'd certainly like to welcome you back to the Rail Academy. If you'd like to come back in the future and discuss a non-Nexus project, we'd be delighted to have you back. So if we can express our thanks in the usual way.
Include the presenters. We have another 13 online. 13 online. For our first hybrid. Well, that's not bad. That's pretty good. Yeah, that's good. Shout.
So, any other business to discuss tonight? No?
No, I think so.
Okay, well, thanks again for your presentation. And the next meeting, Tuesday, the 1st of April, here, and this is related to granite curve stabilisation works.
Another lifelong headache.
Thank you very much.
And thanks very much, James. Right.
Yeah, Marty, one more.
I think so.
It's one of the jobs out
Oh, Rob Wilkins. All right, where's he from that? From the LinkedIn. Yeah, there's somebody already.
Don't do a lot of network rail.